Welcome back to Speducation. My name is Brandon Reed, and I will be your host. Well, we're finally here. The last video in the series, Parts of an IEP. It's been 6 weeks. It's been a long journey, but we finally made it. And I know that you're probably thinking, my God, this was just so long. Well, yes, it was long, but that's what an IEP is. It can be short, it can be long, it depends on the individual. That's why it's called an individualized education plan. But now, hopefully after today's video, you'll feel a little bit more confident about going into IEP case conferences and you'll know exactly what to expect. So without further ado, let's jump into today's lesson. So today's topic, parts of an IEP, week 6. So today we're going to be looking at reevaluation, notice of initial proposed IEP, and notice of implementation. So let's take a look at the first item on our topic, reevaluation. So what is reevaluation? Well, basically, reevaluation is what we do if we feel that the student has met their goals or if we feel that there are other areas where the student might need support, okay? So, for example, if you have a student that is, let's say, in kindergarten or first grade, and they have a speech impairment, okay? You continue to work with them on this. They have an IEP, but they get to 10th or 11th grade and they've never been reevaluated. They really don't have a speech impairment anymore, but they still receive services for that. Do you think that that is going to help the student? Do you think that having them pulled out for support for an impairment that they no longer have is going to be beneficial to them? Well, if you answered no, then you're probably right. And that's why we do reevaluations. Okay. So reevaluations are supposed to happen every 3 years, but realistically, we talk about reevaluation at every annual case conference because if the parent feels that there might be some additional disability or there might be some additional issues that didn't come up in the initial evaluation, the parent can request a reevaluation. Okay. They're not necessarily as intense as an initial evaluation, but they are thorough and they provide more insight as to whether or not a student has developed a new learning disability or has grown out of a current one. So that's why in the IEP, it says triennial, okay, 3-year, all right? That's why it's important that we put the eligibility date when the student was there, and then we put the 3-year mark when we talk about, reevaluation, okay? It says the case conference committee has reviewed existing data and has determined, and then we're going to choose one of these, okay? This is usually the last question when it comes to the IEP, okay? Reevaluation. Does the case conference committee feel that a reevaluation is necessary? If the answer is no, then you move on. If the answer is yes, then you have to choose one of these and then explain why. All right, participants. So when we complete an IEP, okay, one of the things that we have to include are the participants. So whoever participated in the case conference, typically that's the PAR, the dean or the assistant principal, whoever the administrator is. Then you have the special ed teacher of record. Then you have the general ed teacher. Then you have the parent and or the student, depending on what age the student is. And then you might have a counselor in there as well, or you might have another administrator, or you might have a school psych, whatever the case is. If there's an advocate and the parent brings in an advocate from outside of the school, then their name would also be in here. But it's important to list all of the participants that participated in the case conference. Notice of proposed IEP. So what does this mean? Well, basically, this means that this is the notice of the initial proposed IEP. Okay. Typically, before we finalize it, we show it to the parent, and then they will say, okay, I have been presented with a copy of the individualized education program. Okay. Really, this page doesn't, I don't think, really shows up on Indiana IEP. I think once you get to the final page of the IEP, it's basically this, but it's not necessarily the proposed IEP. It's, basically you either finalize it or it's still a draft. Okay. However, if the parent is okay with whatever is in the IEP, all right, then the parent would click I consent to the provisions or I refuse. If you refuse, then that means that you're not happy with something in the IEP, and we can either go back and discuss it and adjust it at the meeting, or we can set up another meeting for another day where we can discuss it, discuss your concerns and maybe address those, and then also make sure that the IEP is compliant with what you wish. Either way, okay, when you get done with this, if the parent consents and says, yes, I'm happy with it, then they will sign and date it. Okay. But again, I really haven't seen this. I really haven't seen this page in Indiana IEP. Typically, this is the page that we see when we get to the final page of the IEP. This is the page that we see, the notice of implementation. Okay. It looks very similar to the proposed IEP. Okay. It has the same wording. Okay. And then down here, it basically says, I understand that as a parent of a student with a disability, I have protection under the procedural safeguards. Okay. Basically, when you get to this point, the notice of implementation, that means that we have discussed the IEP. That means that the parent has agreed to all of the services and all the provisions that are in the IEP, and they have marked off that they agree to it. Okay. And I typically will say, are you happy with the way the IEP is written? Do you have any questions or other concerns? If the parent says, yes, I'm happy with it, I don't have anything else, then we move on to this page. And then in here, just like the proposed IEP, it gives you all the necessary information that you have. Okay. I understand that the school is not required to get my written consent and comply and can implement this IEP unless I take one of the following actions within 10 school days. This basically means that if we hold a case conference, okay, we set it up, we contact you 3 times, you don't show up to it, okay, then you have 10 school days to respond, okay? If after 10 school days you do not respond, then on the 11th day, we can implement the IEP as it is written, okay? But this statement right here, okay, basically says that you have 10 days to either accept the IEP or refuse the IEP or ask for another meeting, okay? And that's basically what this is saying here, all right? So if after 10 days we implement the IEP and then you contact me and say, you know what, I actually, wasn't really happy with the IEP, can we set up another meeting? Absolutely. Okay, we can set up another meeting and you can discuss your concerns about the IEP and we can revise it at that point. But if we don't hear from you within 10 days, then the system automatically accepts it. The procedural safeguards. So when you get the finalized IEP, you'll have 2 things to sign. The first is the procedural safeguards. Okay. Basically, the procedural safeguards are your rights as a parent. It's that 25-page document that a lot of parents, get. And by the time your student is in, 11th or 12th grade of high school, if they have an IEP, chances are you've got about 8 or 10 copies of this. But we're required to offer it to you every case conference. So whether you accept it or not, okay, you need to sign and date that you were offered it. If you were not offered the procedural safeguards, then you don't need to sign and date because obviously they weren't offered to you, but that is a requirement of special ed teachers. The second line here is the consent to implement the IEP. So let's say you actually show up to the meeting, okay? You agree with everything that's in there, then you're going to sign and date it. And then once you sign and date it, then we can make the IEP active, and then it's good for another year. Okay. So this is the final page of the IEP. And that is the final slide of the series, Parts of an IEP. We did it. Congratulations. Celebrate. Yay, 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 yay. All right. I know I'm cheesy, corny, whatever. But it took us a long time to get through it. And hopefully now you feel a little bit more confident and less intimidated by an IEP. So now, what are we going to talk about next? Well, next week, we are going to be talking about what qualifies for special education services. So you may be wondering, does my child qualify for special ed services? Well, we'll talk about that next week. And hopefully you like this video. And if you did, please click the like button. And if you want updates on future videos, feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell for updates on future videos. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to post in the comments and share your thoughts, especially about future videos. And if you know somebody that could benefit from this channel, please feel free to share this with them, because that's why I do this. I do this channel to help parents understand special education better. So if somebody might benefit, please share it with them. And until next time, class dismissed.